Right, hello, greetings. Welcome to the Philosophy Club. Today, it's the Sunday, the 11th of August here in France, and it's the final day of the Olympics. The closing ceremony is taking place pretty much as I speak, and it's been a pretty, fascinating couple of weeks for the Olympians. So I'll say a few words first. I'm alone today, so I can ramble a bit more with my philosophical discourse. I don't have to do necessarily the tarot or even the periodic table, we'll see. I've got quite a lot to say generally about philosophy, so I think we'll stick with a general sharing today. So this week has been the Olympics, full of interesting, extraordinary events. I thought the opening ceremony was pretty interesting. I'm watching a very good classic television, film about Versailles at the moment. It's in many seasons and many episodes, and it's a Franco-Canadian, British-American production, so you can watch it either in French or English. It's really worth seeing, and it's filmed in and around Versailles, and it features the life of Louis XIV and his crazy dream to build that place, and it's full of intrigue and wonder and everything. It sums up France. But yes, I think France has pulled this off very well, and the streets of Paris have done really well with the opening ceremony. Louis had trouble with the people of Paris because of the Fronde, which was a civil war that broke out when he was only 9. The citizens were not very fond of Mazarin, who was his very strict cardinal, enforcing very strict kind of Catholic dogma, and the average Parisian wanted something a bit more open. So there was a great big revolt, and this, I think, traumatized Louis. His mother was Spanish Catholic, and she was quite narrow, I think, in her theology. So that brought up Louis to think, the same. And so eventually the whole Protestant Europe turned against him, especially after he undid the Edict of Toleration, which had granted toleration to the Protestants of France. And that, of course, is when the British got involved, and it led to the trimming of France's sails, if you want. So it's fascinating to watch the historical research that's gone into this production. I think they've had a big team researching, the plots, the action, the characters, the details, the costumes, and the venue. And it should be watched by everyone interested in Europe and France, I think. And the acting is superb. The key role is played by an actor who featured in that very good filming of Vikings attacking Anglo-Saxon England, Vikings, and the first season he played the role of the young monk that was attacked in Lindisfarne, and then became a frequenter at the court in Wessex. A very thoughtful and good actor who plays this character very well. So anyway, yes, I missed a conference of philosophical practices that was going on earlier this week. Sadly, I can't do everything. I sort of half signed up to attend. It's one thing that philosophy is, it's not just about theory and books, it's also about practice and praxis, and it's about therapy, really. I mean, Socrates called himself a midwife. The metaphor in the Pythagorean and Platonic tradition is that philosophy leads to catharsis, which is the purification of the soul. It's the origin of the word cathar, which is a purified form of Christianity. And so, so I do my own philosophical practice, as it were, as well as, these talks and sharings. A great French intellectual called Pierre Hadot spoke about, did the classical philosophical tradition practice something like meditation? Or is that just from the East? Was it just Buddha and the yogis of India that invented that, and the Jains? Well, Pierre Hadot wrote a whole book about this, and no, there are many, many traces that the philosophers of Greece and Rome and Phoenicia and North Africa and Egypt, which we call the classical tradition, and then it transmorphed into early Christianity, if you want, in its philosophical content. They practiced a form of meditation, and he explains it all. Pierre Hadot, a genius, he's dead now sadly, one of France's greatest classical scholars in the 20th century. So I also attended a meeting with Haaretz, because I subscribe to the newspaper. It's well worth doing that. It gives a kind of liberal insight into what's going on in Israel and Gaza. Haaretz is the oldest newspaper in Israel, founded during the British Mandate in the 1920s, and it tends to be left-leaning intellectuals, left to centre. But they have a good coverage, and so there were two journalists talking about, what's going on, where's this war going, what's happening, what's the international community doing, and what's America doing, and so on. Very interesting discussions, which you can get invited to if you subscribe. I've also just submitted a paper for an academic journal about the protocols and modalities behind the periodic table. I think it's time to, get more academics interested in using it, and the way to do that is to get a, peer-reviewed article about it, why it was designed the way it is and how it works. So I'm hoping, I met the deadline to get that through. I've been involved also this week with the Delphic Academy. I'm involved, as you know, with the educational wing of the Delphic Games, which is like the sister to the Olympic Games. The Olympics also have an Olympic Academy based in Lausanne. We have a Delphic Academy, which is headquartered in Berlin, and I've been asked to be the coordinator of that. Going forward, I finished my 3-year stint as educational coordinator of the Delphic Games. I lament and have to say there have been no Delphic Games taking place on my watch this last 3 years. It's not my fault, it's not my duty to organise them as the educational coordinator. There's been, unfortunately, too much personalities and politics, and nationalism gets involved, and it's just, I imagine it was like this in the beginning of the Olympic Games as well. So I'm stepping back, and I'm going to be involved just with the Delphic Academy from now on. I'm going to be doing and organising and helping colleagues to do research into the history of the Delphic Games, the history of the Delphic ideal, the history of this idea of know thyself, which was the Delphic motto, and also the history of the Delphic Oracle. I want to do some research with help from profound, enlightened colleagues about the nature of oracular consciousness, indeed prophetic consciousness. A prophet is also a Greek word, and so what is the difference between an oracle and a prophet? I want to go into all that. And can we revive this for our troubled, dangerous times? I suppose in academia, the closest you get is kind of future studies. Future studies, people look at the future, and I was a friend of Kenneth Boulding, one of the founders of future studies. But I think it's become too technical, too social science, data-driven, statistics kind of thing, and it's lost its spark. Kenneth, as a Quaker, knew about the importance of imagination and inspiration, and I think what we can do with the Delphic Oracle project is see if we can get young minds focused on how would we restart the Delphic Oracle? What would it look like? How would it function? My proposal is that it should always function during the Delphic Games, whenever they meet. If the organisers of the Games can get their act together and actually organise a game somewhere in the world, then we will try and organise a parallel Delphic Oracle to be in residence in Delphi. The Games don't always take place in Delphi, they can be anywhere in the world. Well, the Delphic Oracle would be in situ in Delphi for consultation during that time. And I think that would be a brilliant thing to revive, ancient wisdom, as I'm saying about Pierre Hadot. They had meditation, but they also had oracular consciousness and prophetic wisdom. And I think there's a mistaken idea in some religions, like Judaism, Islam, to some extent Christianity, this notion that only some people can do prophecy, and that's shut now, it's closed. That's a ridiculous concept, that you can close the prophetic mind. And Blake and all the druids and bards of Britain have been, saying, no, hang on, we do prophetic consciousness. There's a grade within the druid schools called ovates. We train to do prophetic visioning, and you can do this based on your own intuitive knowing, or you can do it based on signs in nature, cloud shapes, lightning bolts, birds' flight. I mean, the Etruscans were brilliant at this. They called it augury, and the augury is similar to the prophetic or oracular consciousness. So I'll be going into all that with the Delphic Academy and asking, well, what is this thing? How can we inculcate that why don't our schools look at these kinds of things? What about our universities? And I'm going to be spreading the Delphic Academy ideals to universities and colleges and schools around the world. Because the Delphic ideal of education is to know thyself. Pupils all over the world, I've taught thousands of students in my time, they're at the moment, they're sort of torn because they're afraid they have to get their exam results. They have to pass to get into the good university, to get the good training so they can get a good career and job. And it's like a rat race that they have to do. And they daren't look at stuff that's not technically on the syllabus for their exams. They become like little exam robots that then learn just by rote the right answers to questions. And this starts at GCSE level in England and Britain, and it goes on through A level and up to A level's a bit more, broad-minded. You can write essays and stuff, and then but that is all a million miles away from what the Delphic ideal of education is, which is it should be enabling students, young minds, to know themselves. The core element of education is self-knowledge. Now, this has never been lost sight of in the East, in the schools of the rishis and the sages, in the Vedas and the Upanishads. I mean, that's the purpose of higher education, to work with a sage who has mastered self-knowledge, atma vidya, to use the Sanskrit term, and then can pass that on to students who catch fire with that concept. And that's what the Delphic Games were for. So my job is to try and get that ideal back into universities and schools around the world. And they will only qualify for a Delphic school status if they can prove that they have that ideal still in their curriculum, in their extracurricular activities, in the way they handle difficulties in the schools and so on. And likewise, universities. Not every university really deserves the Delphic University's accolade, because many of them have become factories for exam passing and churning out degree graduates for careers in business, economics, finance, and technical subjects, all aimed at money making. Well, this is a million miles away from the Delphic ideal of higher education and the Academy of Plato, the school of Pythagoras, who was also inspired by Delphi, and the schools of Orpheus, the mystery schools. These were all about knowing yourself in the truest, deepest sense, knowing your spiritual self, your immortal self in the Platonic sense. And that's the purpose of the Delphic Academy, is to put that back on the agenda of the educational institutions in the world. So watch this space. I'll be doing that in the coming little while. And we had a very inspirational meeting with a core group who are forming a committee for the Delphic Academy with myself. And it was very inspirational, so thanks to all that came. I've also been involved still this week with the international panel, independent panel for monitoring India's elections and democracy. We had a meeting where we discussed, many of the problems that are ongoing in India. One of our colleagues has pursued, like a dog with a bone, enormous evidence that the figures were massaged to give Modi the appearance of a victory, which in some respects probably wasn't even deserved. So there's a lot of questions to be asked, and questions are being asked in the Indian Parliament about this. it led to some very interesting discussions, and I shared a couple of books that I urged everyone to read. And yes, and I still am busy as ever writing my 99 Names of Peace book, which is one of my most epic works. I reckon it's going to be a 2-volume, 1,000-page book. I don't seem to be able to write small books anymore. But then it doesn't, work for smallness if you take on a project that lists 99 of the most important languages on the planet, both now and in the past. Everything from Spanish, Arabic, Chinese, Latin, Gaelic, Hindi, Hebrew, Ukrainian, Persian, French, Greek, Japanese, Iroquois, ancient Egyptian, Turkish, and so on. There's 99 of them. And each chapter's got a whole description of what that language is about, what its structure is, a little bit about the grammar, not too technical. And it gives a list of words for peace and related issues like, concord, tranquility, and conflict resolution and so on in those different languages, which is a lot of research. And then, as if that's not enough, I'm adding 99 projects from my institute's quiver. These are arrows, if you want, from the Greenwood in the Robin Hood School of project development, which is they're aimed at shooting down the ignorance that's running amok on this planet. There are Sophia-phobic mobs roaming the streets of Britain doing racist chants. There are Sophia-phobic mobs in the Israeli Defense Force slaughtering and killing largely innocent Palestinian men, women and children who had nothing to do with the attacks. They've used like a sledgehammer to kill a gnat, which is just really a showing of the ignorance, the Sophia-phobia. What are they so afraid of? That the Palestinians should have their own little country? I mean, they're tiny, but noble and amazing people. I've travelled and met Palestinians and have huge respect for them intellectually and spiritually. And, Israel's just got to back off and stop beating them up, or the international community will eventually lumber into action and do something. And Turkey is now taking this matter of genocide to the International Court of Justice, which is a good move. Turkey used to be the great power of the region, has a moral duty, I think, to try and clear up this mess. So does Britain, but Britain has sort of been hijacked by extreme right-wing Tory forces over the last few years, which have been hand in glove with extreme Zionism. They're working from the same playbook, which is unfortunate and very, very disheartening to those of us who actually love Israel in its more, gradual, liberal, socialist and green perspective. All the Israelis I've ever met are amazing people. It's a nation of visionaries and prophets. It's not a nation of mass slaughterers. How that's come about is a job for historians to work out, and Ilan Pappé has done his best to try and figure out how Zionism was hijacked and converted from a sort of liberal ideal of homecoming and tikkun and prayer and coexistence, like Martin Buber wanted with the Palestinians, to becoming a weaponized craziness, like a racist triumphalism that has no respect for the other, be it Christian, Islamic, secular, Palestinian, whatever, just has no intellectual intelligence, actually, or moral intelligence. This kind of robot Zionism has become the weaponization of AIPAC in America that has dumbed down American politics into becoming a collusion power with genocide, actually. And this is all very worrying if like me and Chomsky, you believe in America and Israel and you want to see the best of them flourish, not the worst. It's like some dark forces have stolen the play script, and yes, so that's kind of, I've been up to trying to head that off, and that's why I was attending the Haaretz meeting. But anyway, these projects, one of which is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East, which I've spoken about before if you follow my work, and the Mary Magdalene Studies Association even. I'm trying to sort of find the esoteric roots of all these traditions. And so there's 99 incredible projects which are in this book, and I can't wait for it to be published. I hope it'll be published in time for, well, it's going to be published this winter. Whether it'll be ready for Christmas, I don't know, because I've got to number 54 of 99, so, you know, and I've been working on it most of this year, so. Anyway, one can't hurry the work of the gods. One of the most exciting projects I've just finished in this sequence is number 53, which is a project I've had for a long time. I'm a great fan of Lord Francis Verulam, or Francis Bacon, a philosopher in England. I've been to St Albans, been to where his house was, studied his works for years, dived deeply into the Bacon Shakespeare authorship issue. I don't believe personally, this is just a little aside, no, I don't think Bacon wrote Shakespeare, but I think they were friends. I think they were wisdom lovers even, I'd go so far as to say. And I think Bacon gave Shakespeare quite a lot of brilliant ideas and even language. And when you hang around very clever people, your language improves. And I think Bacon was one of the friends Shakespeare was fortunate enough to hang around, along with the Earl of Southampton and Mary Sidney and that whole coterie of wits that were meeting in, Mary Sidney's place. She was married to the Lord Herbert in Wilton House, which I've been to. And I think all this, I mean, Shakespeare was a grammar school boy from Stratford, but he'd fallen in amongst these geniuses. And I think it really upped his game. And he listened as they were discussing their trips to France. He himself went to France, did Old Will, and he also went to Rome even, because we know he signed into the English College in Rome, which is the Roman Catholic visiting place you can stay at, just near Rome. And so a man of intelligence and a friend of Bacon. Now anyway, Bacon was a philosopher, Will wasn't. And Bacon's real great work is called The Advancement of Learning, De Augmentis Scientiarum in Latin, which he published in 1624 in Latin. He first wrote it in English. And what Bacon did in this great work, which should be read by every student interested in philosophy, especially in the English-speaking world, he did a survey of all known knowledge. It was quite visionary what he did. There were precedents. I mean, Aristotle tried to do a sort of survey of all knowledge, but not specifically. The Stoics had a similar idea. And in the Islamic world, there were Islamic polymath genius scientists who were doctors and who were also trying to do a survey of all known knowledge. But nobody, until Bacon, did it completely systematically. Although Syed Hossein Nasr, in his great book on Islamic science, does give some examples in the Ottoman Empire as well as the Persian. But I think, anyway, what Bacon did in 1624 was a survey of all known knowledge, and then he was coining new words for the things we don't know, the branches of knowledge for which there's no vocabulary yet because we haven't even thought of it. I mean, things like parapsychology didn't exist. There was no word for it. There was no such thing as near-death experience because there wasn't a word for it. The concept wasn't really, formulated. And so what Bacon does is he articulates the gaps in our knowledge, and then he suggests how we might develop our knowledge so that we can fill in these gaps. And that's where he suggests the scientific method. He painstakingly, explains how the scientific method could be used to advance real knowledge, not just sort of theory, supposition, opinion, my view. I mean, no, actual science, real knowledge. And this book was epochal. He dedicated it to his king, James VI of Scotland, who was a friend of his, and who was himself a very learned man. He was the son of Mary Queen of Scots, who was a great woman, I think, and also who spent a lot of time here in France. And if you haven't watched Reign, it's a sort of soap opera based on her youth in France. It's a lovely romp. And yes, so James was a wise man, and Bacon dedicated the book to him. And it is a masterpiece. Now, okay, but that was then, that's 400 years ago. We're in the year of the 400th anniversary of De Augmentis Scientiarum. And I'm suggesting in this project, which I'm going into print on, that it's time we did a new edition. In 2024, we have to do a second edition of The Advancement of Learning. And this time I'm going to write to all the great leading thinkers, scientists of the world and say, help, let's do this jointly. No one person can do it. Even Bacon couldn't do it alone. And tell me what you don't know. So if I write to great experts in linguistics, in chemistry and physics, in biology, astronomy, geography, history, philosophy, and say, well, look, what don't you know? That's where we'll start from, because that's the terra incognita of what is still unknown, waiting to be discovered. We don't really know how AI is going to impact on education. We don't know how the possible discovery of life on other planets, which is looming ever more prescient, is going to affect our self-image in the universe. If it turns out, hey, there've been microbes on Mars for millennia before even this planet. And that they've just discovered a very, very big planet, like bigger than Jupiter, which seems to have life on it in a solar system not too far from here. It's only got a code name at the moment. So this is exciting. How will that impact our self-knowledge on behalf of the Delphi Academy? That's the key question here in the new advancement of learning, is how does this knowledge, that's the other question I'll ask them all, is how does your field of specialism relate to the development of self-knowledge on the part of humanity? And the other key question is, how does this knowledge help advance peace? Because to me, as a peace studies educator, that's the purpose of education. The inner peace that comes with self-knowledge in the Delphic mode, but also the collective social peace that comes from my being secure that other people are on their self-knowledge journey and therefore not going to go crazy and come here and stab me or steal my whatever, and therefore the virtues in the Kantian ethics tradition can flow from that knowledge that we are working to acquire. That's what I'm going to be asking these these scientists to explain how their bit of knowledge fits in with the bigger picture of the need to find self-knowledge. Anyway, that's all the project. That's just one project. It's called The New Advancement of Learning, number 53, which I've just been writing up this week. And that's allied, interestingly enough, with the Danish language. Because Denmark is a land of philosophers, it's the place of Kierkegaard, it's the place of many great thinkers over the centuries. It's given English a lot of our words because of the Viking settlements and King Alfred allowing Danelaw and stuff. So I've been to Denmark. It's one of the happiest countries in the world. And yes, so I marry up the languages with the project. And also because King James married a Danish wife, and William Shaw, his master mason, helped bring her back to Scotland, Queen Anne of Denmark, who had a long happy marriage with James, had her own little mini court in London when they moved down and he became King of Great Britain. He was the first king of the United England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland story. So he was the founder really of the United Kingdom, and so anyway, so the Danish language seems appropriate for this project. And in each case, I've married up a project with an appropriate, language. Okay, so that's I've been up to. And also I want to share something else. 2 books I've been reading, which are really important. They're taking up my time. I always have a couple of proper academic history books or something on the go at any one time. I've been reading through a lot in these years, and I really recommend you to read these books. Okay, Naomi Klein, The Shock Doctrine. It's a classic. It was published in 2007, and I'm ashamed to say that this is the first time I'm reading it. Penguin Books brought it out. Naomi is a Canadian activist, thinker, intellectivist, as I call them, like me. She's a wise woman. I saw her giving a talk at the, yes, I think it was one of the protest camps against Gaza. I can't remember, maybe it was Toronto University had organised a kind of symbolic action, and she was one of the intellectuals that went and spoke to give support. But anyway, this book is absolutely sobering reading. I don't know how she did the research, it's extraordinary, but what she's arguing, the subtitle of the book, The Shock Doctrine, is The Rise of Disaster Capitalism. What Naomi is saying is that capitalism has found a way to make profits out of our suffering and misery. And in the case of whether they're natural disasters like earthquakes, it rushes in and still makes a profit. Or manufactured artificial shocks like war, and she talks about, say, the invasion of Iraq in 2003, which was called shock and awe. The intention of the military is to cause shock to the population, and they regard that as winning. But she's also talking about economic shocks, especially right-wing, neoliberal, Milton Friedman-inspired extreme capitalists. They're like, if Stalin was a horrible thing to the communist tradition, so Milton Friedman is the same extremism to capitalism. I'm a Keynesian somewhere in the middle here, a left-leaning liberal democrat that wants social democracy and peace. Well, Milton Friedman is on the extreme right, and Stalin was on the extreme, I don't know what, the extreme diabolic. I wouldn't call it the left, because he was just crazy. And I think he was a Tsarist, infiltrator, by the way, in the whole Bolshevik movement. And he'd gone back and forth, being a double, triple, quintuple agent. He lost sight of who he was actually working for. And anyway, they're all dead. He had them killed off. So in the end, he ended up working for himself. But Milton Friedman is similar, and he was a friend of Thatcher, and she documents in detail how he and the University of Chicago economics faculty deliberately worked with Pinochet to shock the people of Chile and to destroy all their social security, to destroy their experiment in developmental economics. So the southern cone of Latin America in the 60s was flourishing. It had brilliant left-leaning Keynesian economists applying developmental economics, and most people had quite a good income. There was a rising middle class. The poor working class were being elevated. Shanty towns were kind of disappearing, and foreign corporations were taxed. They were regulated, and it was a pretty much a sort of socialist continent. And then along comes Milton Friedman and the extreme right-wing capitalist. They call them neoliberals. I think it's an insult to the term liberal. They should be called neo-fascists. I don't know what to call them. They're beyond the pale. What they did is they worked with Pinochet, who was a fascist, to take over the government of Allende, and then to arrest all the leftists in the country and have them killed off, tortured usually, using shock tactics, which Naomi Klein tragically uncovers had been pioneered by a psychiatrist in McGill University in Montreal, where I was born, and had been used as a treatment for psychiatric disorders. This guy wrote books and became famous, arguing that if somebody's mentally ill, what you have to do is shock them with a large number